So let's begin with this. So as people are joining, I want to educate all of you on what is the immune system and the modern theory of the immune system. And what I'm going to share with you today is a talk that I was asked to give back in November of 2019. It's almost 1 year ago now, at the National Science Foundation. As many of you know, the National Science Foundation is a premier center for science that includes many, many universities, but it's part of the United States government. And I was asked at one of the NSF centers to give what's called a prestige talk. It's an invited talk that it's a big honor to get invited to give these talks on a modern theory of the immune system. And the reason I want to give that background is in the midst of all the campaigning I've done, my political positions, the mainstream media or those in power, it's a little bit harder for them to critique me on my credentials and the fact that I'm a full working scientist. So I wanted to give that other part of my life that I do and also use this opportunity so all of you can get grounded on a theory of the immune system, on a modern theory. The concept of the immune system that is ignorantly being promoted in mainstream media, that's promoted by many medical doctors, by so-called quote unquote scientists like Fauci, is an understanding of the immune system that is literally about 100 to 150 years old. So the content that I'm going to share with you is a much more up-to-date understanding of the immune system. Again, as I mentioned, this is a talk that I gave at the National Science Foundation literally a year ago today. And I think it's very, very timely given what's going on to discuss this. And what am I talking about is if you just take the timeline back. So in November of 2019, before the coronavirus hit, I gave a talk explaining to people that one of the most important things is to understand the nature of the modern immune system. I talked about the fact that it's not about vaccines, pro-vaccines or not vaccines. It's about recognizing that one size does not fit all. We need to take a personalized approach to medicine, which means the right medicine for the right person at the right time. And that's what I spoke about then. And then in January, the coronavirus hit. And starting at that time, I shared with people that this entire fear-mongering hoax of the coronavirus would be used to suppress dissent, censorship, as we've seen. Number two, push mandated medicine, which is everyone forced to wear masks, the forced vaccines. And then the third part of it was to force all of us to do lockdowns, the way to destroy the economy. And all those three things have come true. And the reason I want to compel you to think about that is that in the modern world, your future, whether we survive economically or not, will be faced on, are we going to start listening to people who actually have done the work, who actually know the science, or are we going to start listening to people in Hollywood, the talking heads? And that understanding will make a big difference. Look, when President Trump ran, or Donald Trump ran for office, I liked him as a disruptor. However, what I want to say is that around him, we're surrounded by people who really were still elements of the establishment. So when I sent my letter to President Trump in March of this year, and I said, look, please do not do the lockdown. Follow a protocol that is based on a real scientific understanding of modern medicine, which says one size does not fit all. And in fact, if you guys want, you go read that letter, you'll see I said, let's take all of us and let's beef up our immune systems by supporting us with vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin A, but we shouldn't be doing lockdowns and shutdowns. The people who are immunocompromised, they're the ones perhaps who should be quarantined, and they should get high doses of vitamin A and C and et cetera. But it went to the White House and I got it. But unfortunately, had the president, had the White House listened to my recommendations back in March, we wouldn't be in this situation today in any form. The entire world went through a lockdown and the United States could have led. But this is what happens when in crisis situations, we do not go back to scientific and engineering systems understanding, which is based on reality. Had we done that, we wouldn't be in this situation. We wouldn't be on essentially with all the economic situation that's occurring right now. So today, my goal moving forward is to educate leaders. I don't really care for having followers. Followers are a social media thing, but my goal is to educate you to be leaders. but in the world of health that begins by educating you to understand what is the immune system and what is the modern understanding of the immune system. And the talk I'm going to do is going to be the beginning of a series of talks. Tomorrow, I'm going to take the principles that I discussed today to talk to you about oral health, the importance of how what occurs in the mouth is related to immune health. And we'll share a series of discussions so you start recognizing we start with the foundation of the immune system, which you can apply to many, many things. So let's jump right into this. So let's go right here. So when we talk about, as I mentioned, this talk that I gave, that I'm sharing with you, was a talk that I gave, you can see back on November 19th, it was part of the National Science Foundation, and it was called The Modern Theory of the Immune System, an Engineering Systems Approach. Now I'm going to give you a short version of this, and in that talk, I gave a background of how I came to love medicine, what was the research motivation in this. I defined what is systems biology, the technology I created called Cytosolve, and then I proceeded to give a modern architecture of the immune system, and we ended with asking some very important questions. So again, some of you may know of this, but I know a lot of you are new, but my background in science and medicine dates back a long, long time ago when I grew up nearly 50 years ago as a child growing up in two worlds in India. I grew up in the village, in a small village in India, which at least a third of my life, which looked like this, beautiful paddy fields, mountains, and it was just a very pure life. And these were sort of the scenes in that village. And my grandparents were traditional subsistence farmers. My grandmother would be out in the fields planting rice, for 16 hours a day. But on the weekends, and that's a picture of my grandmother, she was the village shaman or the village healer. In most villages could not afford doctors, so there's typically someone who had studied the traditional arts of medicine. So it was a typical weekend on a Saturday or Sunday there would be 30, 40 people lined up at my grandmother's home, and she would diagnose them by observing their face. In the ancient medicines of India, there is in fact a whole treatise, a book written called Samudrika Lakshanam, which basically teaches people how to look at the face and analyze the face, and based on analyzing the face to understand someone's physical state. Now, with wearing masks, it's hard to see people's face. It's a whole nother issue we'll talk about. But the concept of analyzing the face was central to the understanding of someone's state of the health. In fact, every part of the face was associated with different organ systems. So, for example, the tip of the nose was associated with the heart. The center between the brows was associated, for example, with liver. Below the eyes, adrenals, and so on. And so a practitioner like my grandmother could look at someone's face and from a systems approach, understand what was going on with different organ systems of your body, and then come to an understanding of your body type. Now, that entire understanding of the face was based on an ancient system of medicine, which is still practiced today, called Siddha, Siddha, which is practiced in the South still to this day, or in the North known as Ayurveda. And that system of medicine had a whole language, a whole lingua franca. It didn't involve chemicals or genes or proteins or molecules or organs. It involved these words: Purusha, Prakriti, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, space, air, fire, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, all these systems. I'm not going to get into that. In fact, I offer a whole course through our institute called Systems Health where you can learn this. But fundamentally, this idea of the world of Siddha understood that you started with the unmanifest, which means non-existence, which was Purusha. Existence came to be, known as Prakriti, which manifested itself in energy forms known as Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. They're almost flavors of energy, which then congealed into the five elements: space, air, fire, water, and earth, would then recongeal themselves into three subsystems known as Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, which were the foundations of determining what kind of body type you were, called your dosha, and how you deviated from your body type, which manifests itself in what are called the dhatus, which were your tissues, from blood to all different aspects of your body, which then congealed into your whole body, which included your mind, manas, the indriyas, your senses, and your chakra system. Anyway, to keep it simple, behind my grandmother's understanding was a scientific basis, which we in the West may try to poo-poo because we don't understand these words, but there was a whole basis to this. So when I came to India at the age of 7, I was extremely motivated in medicine because I seen my grandmother heal people by observing them, diagnosing them, and coming up with personalized formulations for them, the right medicine for the right person at the right time. Big difference is my grandmother had no degrees in medicine. She had tattoos all over her arms. So she wasn't someone who you would, see from the conventional environment. So when I came to the United States, it's an old picture, I was very interested in medicine. By the age of 14, I ended up, because I was one of those overachieving kids, I ended up getting the opportunity to go to New York University. My dear mother, there was an article that came out saying that New York University was going to invite about 40 kids to go study computer science. I was 14 at the time. I'd finished up all my math courses. My high school had no other courses to give me. So anyway, I got accepted to this program. I would take the train into New York, get up at 5, 6 in the morning, and ended up going to NYU and graduating top of the class in this intense computer science program. After I finished it, I got a full-time job working as a research fellow at what is in the heart of Newark, New Jersey, what is now known as Rutgers Medical School. So I was 14. I was still finishing up some humanity courses in high school, but I got this amazing opportunity to work full-time. And I initially started looking at applying computers to understand why babies were dying in their sleep. Babies have different sleep patterns. In fact, they have 6 states of sleep. And the idea was that SIDS, it's sudden infant death syndrome, where a baby would suddenly stop breathing. And the idea was that if we could follow its sleep patterns, maybe there were certain sleep pattern sequences that led to the baby's arresting of sleep. So I used computers and I came up with some very powerful modeling techniques to predict this. In fact, before I came to MIT, I presented a paper, a scientific paper, with colleagues of mine who were 50, 60 years older than me. But anyway, it was a great experience. But while I was at that university, I also learned about applying computers to build software to build large-scale systems. In those days in that university, every office had a secretary who had the inbox, the outbox, the folders, physical folders in the back, and they would write this thing called a memo. A memo was quite interesting because a memo was literally a memorandum that people would write, which was the medium for communication. So the memo had the to field, this from field, the subject line, the blind carbon copy where you would copy a copy of the typewritten copy that you would do, or the typewritten memo. You would have attachments, and this was all put in what was called an interoffice envelope, and it was sent around the office. So this interoffice mail system was the vehicle for collaboration. So people, if they were going to hire someone, would write a memo, forward it to their boss, attach their resume, carbon copy people. Anyway, as a 14-year-old kid, I was asked to convert this entire system to the electronic version at a time when the experts in the field thought it was impossible to create an electronic version of this. And that's what I ended up doing. And I called that system email. I wrote 50,000 lines of code to capture every feature, ended up winning one of the big awards at the time called the Westinghouse Science Award. And this was before I came to MIT. So by the time I came to MIT when I was 17, 18, I had created the world's first email system, had done medical research, but I was interested in really pursuing medicine. And in fact, when I first came to MIT, on the front page of the newspaper, they were still referring to the fact I created the first email system, for which, by the way, I got the first US copyright officially recognizing me as the inventor of email. The reason I give that background, and I think it's important to understand, is that what I learned as a young person was a systems approach. So email is not simply the exchange of text messages, and this is where the bogus controversy got created. I created email, the system as we know it today, and I have the copyright, the code, etc. But so when I came to MIT, I was very interested in taking a systems approach to understanding the whole human body. But unfortunately, what I came to find out was that the medical system did not really treat the body as a whole system. In fact, if you had an illness or something and you went to the doctor, the body was seen as individual parts, not the whole way like my grandmother saw the body. So if you had a headache, you could be sent to 10 different specialists, a neurologist, you could be sent to a, skeletal system person, an endocrinologist, and each one of those people had a different approach to the body. That's one thing I saw. And then the other thing I found out was the entire pharmaceutical industry, which is extremely important to understand the context of where we are with the coronavirus, et cetera. And this is really important for everyone to understand, is that the pharmaceutical industry is burning and crashing to the ground. So let me repeat that again. The pharmaceutical industry is burning and crashing to the ground. Their only way out of this is vaccines. And you'll understand why in a very short way as I explain this. So if you look at by the way, what is a pharmaceutical? A pharmaceutical is a chemical. It's a drug. That it's typically a chemical that doesn't occur in nature. So for example, if you look at this aloe vera plant that's up here, right? That aloe vera plant has compounds which occur in nature, chemical compounds. But a pharmaceutical is a compound that is synthesized in a lab that did not ever exist in nature. And that synthetic compound is what pharmaceutical companies is, they create those synthetic compounds, patent those compounds, and then try to figure out, oh, that compound could be used to maybe stop Alzheimer's or cancer, et cetera. And in order to get that compound out to the public, they have to go through this very stringent process, as you see here. So the new compound is discovered, then they go test that compound in a test tube. Maybe they have a bunch of test tube which has cancer cells. They drop that compound in the test tube and see if it kills it. If it does, then they go kill a bunch of animals, which is called animal testing. So you go from in vitro test tube to in an animal, which is called in vivo. And if you find success here and it doesn't kill too many animals, the FDA will, you have to file what's called an FDA allowance to get it to go through the FDA process. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 is small groups of humans you test it on. Phase 3 is a lot of humans. Now, this is a pharmaceutical process for what we call drug discovery, okay? And this can take anywhere between 13 years, $5 billion. And by the time it goes through that process and the drug is allowed by the FDA to be consumed by the public, that drug is only good for maybe 10% of the population. So meaning 10% of the population that indication was meant for. The others, it could have massive side effects. It may not work well. It may not be efficacious. It could be toxic. And moreover, if it hurts people, you as an individual can sue the pharmaceutical company. However, all of that changed, by the way, in 1986, when Ted Kennedy, the brother of John Kennedy, created a way for vaccine companies to be protected. So you see, pharmaceutical drugs, you as a person can sue them. However, vaccines you can't. Because in 1962, as we'll talk about, the National Vaccination Act was passed. And when the National Vaccine Act was passed by John Kennedy, it was based on a very simplistic understanding of the immune system, which, quote unquote, concluded that you have to poke someone and give them a vaccine to boost their immune system, okay? So based on that understanding, vaccines became the front line of attack for quote unquote infectious diseases, right? But by 1986, people were being injured by these vaccines. People were suing the vaccine companies. But guess what? Ted Kennedy, John Kennedy's brother, comes in, and instead of allowing you and I to sue the vaccine companies, they created what was called the vaccine court, where it basically meant you cannot sue the companies. You have to take it to a group under Health and Human Services in the government. And you could only sue them in the government, and liability was capped. And moreover, what gets very interesting was the vaccine companies were protected. So think about this. The vaccines, moreover, did not have to go through this stringent regulatory process. You could fast track them, as we've seen now with the COVID vaccines or the RNA vaccines, right? So bottom line, vaccine companies were given a special status. You can't sue them, and the vaccines don't need to go through the same regulatory framework. Now, why is this important? The reason this is important is if you look at the data that is occurring right now, that this entire process is no different. It's a very ad hoc process. You of how we used to build airplanes. You throw a pilot in the airplane, and if he fails, he goes, oh wow, he failed, gee whiz. And if he succeeded, then you try to explain why. And if you look at what's happening in pharmaceutical spending, every year they're spending more and more and more money on R&D, and they're actually finding less and less new drugs. In fact, this is another curve. The bar graph represents more and more spending by pharmaceutical industries, and they're finding less and less new drugs, or less and less drugs are being allowed. So the bottom takeaway from this is pharmaceutical industry model is flailing desperately. Here's another example. Their investments, their number of drugs approved based on dollar investment is going down. So they're less, even the FDA is not approving their drugs. On top of this, we see a huge increase in obesity in the country. So pharmaceutical industry is failing, crashing and burning. We see huge amounts of increase in obesity in the United States. For example, nearly 40% of adults are obese, and nearly, in this case, about 18% of young people are obese. Obesity rates are skyrocketing. And what you find is that the amount of money we spend on healthcare is nearly 20% of GDP. So why are these statistics important? So when you step back and you look at the modern state of healthcare, the drug industry is failing, the obesity rates are increasing, and we know obesity is the basis of many, many diseases. And then here you see healthcare costs are exploding incredibly, okay? So things are not going well for the healthcare industry. And the reason it's not going well is the scientific approach to medicine is what I call reductionist. What do I mean by that? If the elephant here represents a disease like Alzheimer's or the immune system or something like cancer, a researcher in medicine today is not incentivized to understand the whole. Researchers are incentivized to understand pieces. You could win a Nobel Prize just for understanding the piece. So by way of example, this diagram here saying it's reflecting on the old story that the great Buddha talked about the king who brought in 6 blind men and an elephant, and he had the blind men touch parts of the elephant, and each one of them had a dysfunctional understanding. The guy who touched the tail thought the elephant was a brush. The guy who touched the tusk thought the elephant was a spear, and so on. So if they ever were to work together, you would get a completely false understanding of the elephant. And why is this important? Is because if you look at a disease like cancer to be the elephant, academic research is not understanding the whole. They're understanding the pieces. This is why we're not solving any of these major diseases. And the reason is academia, which is the quote unquote scientists, are highly specialized. They don't communicate among each other really. There's no integration of knowledge. They cherry pick what they need, and it's non-holistic. So the very big question we need to ask before we start talking about the whole immune system is, is the way that we're doing research and discovery and innovation correct? First of all, it's very exclusive. A small set of people are determining what is science. It's opaque, meaning very hidden, okay? It's reductionist. People study the parts. It's highly centralized. It's censored, meaning that if you come up with an idea, they force you down this quote unquote peer review process, which they brand as something that's extraordinarily valuable to protect the public from quote unquote, bad science, when in fact, it is a way to control science. And it's depersonalized because the entire biological science is, until recently, is still based on one size fits all, that everyone should get the exact same medicine. All right, so this is some of the big questions. And the question that I want to propose is perhaps the right way to do science is inclusive. Incorporate many people's ideas, make it transparent. Fauci, for example, and the NIH do not want to make a lot of things transparent. They do a lot of their meetings behind closed doors. They come up with a non-systems-based approach. They don't look at the whole. It's, my view is it should be transparent. It should be systems-based. We should be decentralized. We need freedom and open science and citizen science. And we need to focus on science being personalized, which means the right medicine for the right person at the right time. So this notion is very different than this.